So yeah, by the time you guys come back to school, you should see significant changes to campus.
Will the pool be started, like the framing and stuff started in the fall then?
Yeah, I think that whole northern addition, which is the pool, new team room, and the new main office, will all be, like, the construction footprint for that will all be fenced off before the first day of school in September.
So where will the students be parking then?
Yeah, well, so most of the parking lot stays. It's just going to be a question of what does the traffic look like to get into the building. Probably none of the northern doors will be open. You'll have to walk around to the front door.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else before we get started?
Please keep asking me questions. This is the most contact with students I've had in 5 weeks. I don't want to leave.
Or anything else you want to say, Mr. Harnish, while you have these kids?
If anybody has ideas for new videos for me to post on Instagram, send them to me because I'm running out of ideas.
Maybe they could make you some.
I think that you should do some TikTok dances.
I created a TikTok account the other day, so I just haven't had the stones to actually make one yet. I'm thinking about it. I think I can guarantee that I will get to at least one TikTok dance in before the end of the school year. I just got to spend some time making sure that it's awesome.
Oh yeah.
Anyone else? Thank you for the questions. All right, should we get started? Thanks, Mr. Harnish.
Before I hang up, I want I think at the beginning of the school year, and I'm saying this now because I'm talking to mostly juniors, right?
Yes.
Right. So at the beginning of the school year, I challenged everybody to work really hard and crush the ACT. And I have about 170 student scores here. I'm still waiting for the other 30. But based on this packet of papers, you guys crushed the ACT. So as a class, good job.
Nice job, guys.
Awesome, guys. And other than that, I really appreciate you inviting me in here to your teachers and asking me questions. And don't hesitate. Despite the evidence that I just gave that I haven't responded to Dia's email from the weekend, I do try to respond to emails pretty quickly to students. So if you haven't heard from me, it's because I lost it in the 500 emails a day I'm getting right now. So just email me back and I'll try to respond quicker. But it's good to see everybody. Hang in there.
Thanks, Mr. Harnish.
Thank you, Mr. Harnish. Bye, everybody.
See ya. All right, guys, so we're going to get started. I don't want to keep you too long. We'll probably try to do it in a half hour here, and then you'll be on your way. Thanks for coming. Mr. Musak is here as well, kind of sitting in. He's going to be running one tomorrow. And Mr. Krentz is here. He's going to be running kind of this election discussion with us today. If you downloaded the grid view, it's in the upper right-hand corner. If it slows down your computer, you might need to turn it off because that might be the reason why it's slowing it down. But feel free to try it if you want. And then throughout today, we're going to start off with a little activity. I asked you to make a agree, disagree, not sure piece of paper. If you have those, get those. If not, you can use like your finger, like your thumb, agree, not sure, disagree. And yeah, after that, Mr. Krentz and I are just going to lead you through some things that you'll need to know as voters. Many of you guys are going to be voting next year in the presidential election, and we want to make sure that you're prepared to do that. So that's the focus for today. Any questions before we get started? All right. So you guys, most of you are muted right now. That's cool. But by all means, if you have something to say or a question to ask, unmute yourself and just blurt it out. So on Google Classroom, I'm gonna share my screen first here so that you guys can see it. Do you guys see my screen? Okay. On Google Classroom, under the election for the voters, I posted the Google presentation that we're going to be using. So if you want to follow along that way, you can. Otherwise, I am going to pull it up on my screen and you'll see it along with your faces. Do you see both right now? Okay. So here's what we want to do. Oh no, I don't want it full screen. Well, we'll just do it like this. I'm going to go through a where I stand thing, which we would normally do in the classroom. And you guys would go to different corners of the room. We kind of did this at the beginning of the year on, what was the name of that site, Moose? Padlet?
Yeah, Padlet.
Yeah.
Where I stand. Yep.
So all I'm going to do is when I read the statement, I want you to hold up the piece of paper or the thumb, however you want, for how you view that statement. Okay? And then I want you to take a look at what everybody's doing and what everybody says. And then I want us to just talk about it a little bit. So let's do the first one here. Here's the statement. 16-year-olds are educated enough to vote. So put up agree, not sure, or disagree. I see a lot of disagrees, but I see more agrees than normal. So let's start with this. Those of you that are unsure, would anybody care to tell us why you're unsure? And you can just speak up.
Some 16-year-olds are educated well enough to vote, but I know for a fact I was not.
Okay. Any other unsures that want to share? Let's go to agrees. I usually don't have this many agrees, so I'm curious. Some of you said agree. Why did you say agree? So you think because you have the ability to drive, it makes like logical sense to also have the ability to choose who runs your country? Okay.
I feel like driving and voting for president is two completely different responsibility things.
All right. Any other agrees want to pop in?
When I said agree, I was kind of just going off me personally, because I feel like I would be educated enough to vote for who I want as president.
All right, thank you. What disagree, people? Why do you disagree?
I disagree mostly because a lot of the politics that 16-year-olds know is like washed down from the parents, and the parents are like sort of edging them on to who they should vote for. At 16, they can't really make their own choice of who they're going to vote. Like some people can for sure, but most people usually just go with what their parents are looking for.
Thank you. Mr. Davis?
Yeah, so like Zach was saying, peer pressure, like when you're 16, you have a bunch of hormones going through you, and your brain's not fully developed enough to make like, so like the frontal lobe of your brain isn't developed enough to make like good long-term decisions, with the rest of the things. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. How many of you feel like, regardless of this question, how many of you feel that you're more prepared to vote now than you were 4 months ago? I see a few hands. All right. Let's do the next one. Mr. Krantz?
All right. So it is okay to not vote because one vote doesn't make a difference. What do we think about that? A lot of disagrees. That's good. That's good. So was there anybody who said agree to that? I didn't catch anybody who did. Was there anybody who did?
I didn't
Did they
see.
agree to that? and it's good that there isn't many, if there is any. So why do those of you, obviously most of you who said disagree, why do you have that philosophical belief? Anybody want to share their thoughts? Go ahead, Mr. Nolan.
Well, I'm not saying just because of voting, but there are arguments where it is a very close call and where 1 to 2 votes do make a major difference.
Certainly. Yeah, anybody else?
I said disagree because if a lot of people have that mindset, it is going to make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. That was what I was going to say. So it is fairly rare to have an election that comes down to single-digit voting differences. But the thing to remember is if everyone has a belief that one vote doesn't make a difference, then that one vote becomes 10 votes, becomes 100 votes, becomes 1,000 votes. And that's how you can really swing elections, by just having a lot of people who do not believe that their one vote matters. So it kind of has a compounding effect, is what I would say.
There's the biggest example of one vote mattering. I think it was like 4 years ago, and I believe it was in the West Virginia State Assembly. And whoever won that one seat was going to have control between the Democrats and Republicans. So it was really important. And it ended in a tie. So it was a dead tie. And under West Virginia law, they flip a coin to determine who wins an election if there's a tie. So it's one of the two parties, I can't remember who ended up winning, but one of the two parties ended up winning because the coin landed on heads or tails. Kind of crazy. And that's for an entire state.
Yeah, they have it once in Nevada too, and in true Nevada style, when they have a tie election like that, they draw cards, high card wins. Because, it's Nevada.
All right, next one. Only people who voted should complain about the result. I see a lot of agrees, a couple not sures. Are there any disagree? Mr. Weimer, you're hovering between disagree and not sure. How come?
Because I feel like if you don't vote, you still are living in the country, and you could still have a right to your opinion.
Okay.
Well,
Another argument I've heard with that is maybe you were unable to vote for whatever reason, right? Maybe you were in the hospital, maybe you were overseas. I don't know. Those of you that agree, why do you say agree? Mr. Blood, did you say agree?
I did.
How come?
I just feel like if you didn't vote, you can't really complain about what happens if you didn't input.
Good. Anybody else? All right, let's do another one.
I want people to vote even if they don't do their research before they vote. What do you think about that? Mostly disagrees, few not sure. So I guess the follow-up question to that would be, why is it important that people do their research before they go and vote? Why is it important not to just go and blindly vote for someone or a name or even a party person? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Do you guys think people do go and do that? I saw a lot of nods.
I think the question you're asking, I think not doing your research, to the last question, every vote matters. I think if every vote matters and a lot of people don't do their research, it's going to sway the vote.
Certainly, yeah.
And there's
Greg, have you ever voted without doing your research?
I have not. And
You have not.
I mean, I always make it a point to do my research, and it's okay to go and vote and not vote on everything on the ballot either, right? So a lot of times, especially some of the more local races, I can't find information very easily on the web. So I'll go in, I'll vote for the ones that I'm knowledgeable about, and I'll just leave the ones blank that I feel like I can't make an educated vote on. So most people don't know that. They think they have to fill their entire ballot out. But it's a good tool to have. You don't have to vote on everything. All right.
Sometimes there's even only like one person that you can vote for.
Yeah.
For certain, especially in local elections.
They run unopposed. So here's one that has to do with what we are going through right now. Wisconsin was kind of in national spotlight a couple weeks ago because we held our election in the middle of this economic social shutdown. So the statement here is Wisconsin should not have held their election during the COVID-19 pandemic because not everybody was able to easily and safely vote. A lot of agrees. Any disagrees? Speak up if you disagree right now. Mr. Breinig does? Mr. Kyle Breinig?
I put not sure.
Oh, okay.
Isaac Breinig put disagree.
Mr. Isaac Breinig, how come?
I think that those right have the vote go on.
Okay. How come a lot of you disagree? Or agreed, I'm sorry. Agreed. Mr. Nolan?
I know that a lot of people wanted to vote, but they weren't able to. And also, if there was not an election, it would have also got rid of a huge gathering if they did do an in-person election.
Okay. Others?
I agree because I think there was a big, like group of people, such as elderly people, who might not have been able to vote. So you kind of take away an entire group of voters.
What else do elderly people normally do for our elections?
They run the polling station.
Yeah. Moose, what was the stat in Milwaukee?
They only had 5 open. It was mostly National Guard members. Actually, they come in staff. They actually called the National Guard to staff those that were open.
And how many do they normally have?
1,000. I mean, it's hundreds or thousands probably. Green Bay only had 2 polling places. Usually they have dozens. So yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. One of the main arguments with this was that it's just a presidential primary. We already know Joe Biden was going to win, kind of thing. But Wisconsin was unique because it wasn't just who was going to be the Democratic nominee. We had other important races. We had a Supreme Court race. We had a lot of local municipality races. We had school board referendums. So by canceling our election, we would have canceled all that, right? By canceling our election, we wouldn't have known about the result of our school board or our school referendum that you guys asked Mr. Harnish about, and we wouldn't have been able to start construction on the field. So that's one argument to consider when looking at this is there's a lot of things other than just the Democratic nominee. There's no good answer, unfortunately, but there was a lot of debate over that. Governor Evers eventually made an executive order to try and cancel it, but the courts ruled he didn't have that power. So the election went on. And New York today just canceled their election, their Democratic primary. So other states are starting to cancel. Mr. Krantz, last one.
I think Louisiana did too. A number of states did actually going forward. I know Louisiana for sure as well.
Yeah. Mr. Krantz, last one.
All right. Voting is important.
And be honest.
A lot of agrees. Good. Couple not sure's.
Ms. Menendez, how does voting work in Spain?
So,
You there?
okay, sorry. So
It's kind of similar, but instead of like the states, we have like smaller things. So voting is like it's important, but I said that I'm not sure because it's like I don't know how to explain it. It's just like not that important.
Do a lot of people vote in Spain?
Yeah.
We had a student, foreign exchange student once from somewhere in South America. I can't remember the name of the country right now, but voting there is mandatory. If you don't vote, you can get a citation. You can be put in prison. And the only people that get excuses not to are the elderly and the disabled. What do you guys think about that? Should we make voting mandatory?
No.
I see a lot of disagrees. It's interesting. I don't know, right? So let's look at that a little bit more. We'll work our way through this. So this is the voter turnout from 2016. The presidential elections are usually when we have the biggest voter turnout, right? And by looking at this map, you can see the darker states are the ones that had a higher percentage voter turnout. The lighter states are the one that had a smaller percentage. So like Wisconsin, for example, in the 2016 presidential election between Trump and Clinton was at 69%. That's considered pretty high, right? Which is kind of crazy to think that 69%, what would be a D on our grading scale, is like, hey, good job on voter turnout. What do you notice looking at this map, guys, about where the high voter turnout rates tend to be? Go ahead and just shout it out. What'd you say, Mr. Davis?
Northern.
Okay. Mr. Larson, did you say something?
I said the East Coast.
East Coast, okay. And what do we know about some of these states that are darker colored? Other than that, they're Midwest, Eastern states. In some, I mean, parts are, right? I mean, there's some big cities and. Okay. I heard somebody say something else though. Swing. Who said swing states? Yeah, they're swing states, right? So like we learned about the Electoral College and how it's a winner take all in most states. So Wisconsin, for example, we're one of the biggest swing states there are in the 2020 election. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are going to be fighting hard for our 10 electoral votes. And people in these states feel like their vote matters a lot more and might be more willing to go out and vote. Whereas if you're even in California, for example, which is almost always a Democratic state, in a presidential election, people might think, why should I go? If I'm a Republican and I want to vote in California, why should I even vote for president? Because we're going to select a Democrat, most likely. Texas, same way. Historically, they've selected a Republican candidate. But yeah, these northern states are kind of swing states most of the time. Let's go to the next one.
All right, so voting information. So we want to look at how these different, like various forms of media give us different information on candidates and what their beliefs are and what they're interested in. So if we take a look at things like signs, okay, we've all seen political signs out in people's yards. A lot of signs really give us more like name recognition of the candidate and what their like slogans are. So like Donald Trump, make America great again. Those are the types of things that like signs. TV as well will give you some name recognition, specifically slogans of that nature. TV, radio, internet, those types of things are going to give you more detailed information sometimes as far as like what the candidate believes in on certain issues such as like education, immigration, gun rights has always been a huge political thing. Sometimes, at least in today's day and age, we often find like TV is a lot of like attacks against other candidates. So we don't always get a lot of information about the candidate themselves, but we hear a lot about like how they're better than the other candidate or why the other candidate is not as good or why their beliefs are wrong. Okay. We go down like newspapers, those are probably going to be more name recognition type things. You're going to get probably more hopefully unbiased information about what the candidate believes in. Same with magazines a little bit. I'm not sure how exactly like prevalent campaign ads are in your everyday magazine, unless it's like an actual political magazine. Candidate websites are obviously probably going to give you the most detailed information as far as what the candidates' positions on certain issues are. Debates, obviously, you're going to get a little bit of everything. You're going to get name recognition, you're going to get slogans, you're going to get those attacks against the other candidate, you're going to get a lot of information about what the specific candidate believes in themselves. So obviously, you can get a little bit of everything with all of these, except for probably signs. That's going to be probably the most specific name recognition slogan, but throughout these you can get a little bit of everything, and I think it's good obviously to have a mix of it as you like get your information to decide who you want to vote for.
So as a voter, when you're researching and educating yourself to vote, think about which one of these are going to give you the best knowledge on the candidates, the most unbiased. We talked about candidate websites and how you're going to get a lot of detail from there about what a candidate believes, but they're also not going to talk about maybe the bad things that they're known for. So it's important to look for that bias. Newspapers, I actually use a lot when I'm voting for local elections. So like a lot of times, like the Wisconsin State Journal will do a panel interview of like 3 different candidates running for Dane County boards or something. And it's a really good way to get some information on some of those more local candidates. Okay, registration. So you guys will have to register when you want to vote, right? You can't just show up at the polling place and say, hey, I want to vote. You have to bring certain pieces of information with you and prove you are who you are or who you say you are. Each state's a little bit different, but in the state of Wisconsin, you need to prove that you live where you say you live, because even like for myself in Mount Horeb, there's 2 different polling locations. I can't go to either one. I have to go to the one that my address is assigned to, right? And I need to know where that is. So there's a couple different websites out there. One is My Vote Wisconsin, which is a really good website. You can actually put in your name and your date of birth. So I'll show you mine for an example.
As Mr. Brager is typing that, when I lived in Madison for college, I lived there 4.5 years. I think I voted in 3 different polling places. So if you live in a bigger city, you're gonna have that happen a lot.
Yeah, when you're in college, you move like every year, and you have to re-register every single time you have a new address. Now that I own a house and Mr. Musak owns a house, we live in that house pretty consistently. We only have to register once, right? Unless we decide to move, then we'll have to re-register again. When I taught in Portage, I lived just outside of town and I lived in a township. There were Portage polling places within 2 minutes from me, but I couldn't vote there. I had to go to the other side of the township where the town hall was and vote. And it was like a 20-minute drive. So you have to go to those locations. But My Vote Wisconsin, kind of a cool website. You can look for sample ballots. You can look at who your elected officials are, all of your voter information. You can also register on this website. You can request absentee ballots. The other kind of cool thing is it shows you your history of voting. So these are all of the elections that I have voted in. They don't tell you who you voted for, right? But they tell you, like in the most recent one, I requested an absentee ballot. Here's my polling place. Here's my municipality, that sort of thing. So you can actually look at anybody you want, as long as you have their first name, last name, and date of birth. You can look at how often they voted. Kind of a crazy thing. Moose, any idea if it's legal to look at that for jobs? Like, could a future employer look at your voting record?
Not that I know of. I mean, it's public record, I think, if I remember right. It's public record, so I think they could, but I'm not sure they can legally do that. I don't know if they based their decision fully on that or not.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. All right.
That'd be fun. I don't know.
When you register, so one thing that you'll have to do is prove that you live where you live. And there's a number of ways you can do that. You can do it with your driver's license. You can do it with a property tax bill. You can do it with your lease. So like when you guys go off to college in a couple of years or go into the workplace, you'll probably be renting a house. You can use your lease to show your address. It could be a utility bill, a bank statement, but somehow you have to prove your address. Let's see what else here. You can register at the polling place if you want. I highly recommend not doing that. Anybody know why? There's a separate line for that. So you would have to go wait in line to register at the polling place. And then once you get done getting registered, you go to the back of the line to vote and you got to wait in line again. So taking care of things in advance is huge. And the other thing in the state of Wisconsin that you have to do is you have to have a photo ID, a government issued photo ID to vote. Whether you're registered or not, every single time you got to bring that with you. So it would be like your passport, your driver's license, your, I don't know what else are allowed, but picture ID.
Yeah, and not all states are the same. So if you go to different states, you might not be able to register at the polls. Wisconsin, with a few states in the country that allow same-day poll registration. You got to prove you lived at your location for like 10 days, I think it is.
Yeah. Mr. Krantz?
All right, polling places. So polling places are where you go. So these are typically going to be public buildings such as like a library, community center, maybe even a fire station. Usually these are they have to be a place where they have are easily accessible for all people. So they have to be handicap accessible. They have to be in a location where people can easily get to them safely. Those are going to be announced usually probably through a newspaper. They'll be posted also. I don't know if they do them like on a utility bill. Mr. Brager could probably speak to that.
I'm not sure. My Vote Wisconsin is the best way to find out.
Yeah, I've seen it, but yeah. They might tell you on like your village note. I get a note from the village every month that tells me where to go then, but that's about it.
That could, yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. So anyway, going off of that, so Mr. Brager touched on this. So Mr. Brager and I both live actually in Mount Horeb. So we have two different polling locations. One side of town votes at a library. The other side of town votes at a community center. So Mr. Brager lives on the side of town that is closest to the community center. So he votes at the community center. I live on the side of town that's closest to the public library. So I vote at the public library. So basically they just, wherever you are, I guess, they do it by so it's an even amount, correct? It's not necessarily where you're closest.
Correct.
So they basically split up the town in half. Half goes to one location, half goes to the other. I happen to be at the library. Mr. Brager happens to be at the community center.
They try to get them close, but it also has to do with, like, if your village has districts, for example, or wards, then you have to go to the one where you would get the proper ballot.
Yep.
All right. Voting methods. Pretty much always in Wisconsin, we're going to be using paper ballots, where you literally just mark your stuff on a paper. This is what a sample ballot from the last election. This is from Waterford. It's just one I found on Google. But you can see here's the presidential preference vote. You could choose to either vote in the Democratic Party for the Democratic election or in the Republican Party for the Republican election. And you can only do one or the other since it's a primary. But you get to choose which one you want to do. And then here are the rest of the ballot for Waterford, this random Wisconsin city. And you just fill in the circle. You have to make sure you follow the directions properly. You have to make sure that you fill in your circle properly, right? It's kind of like an ACT where you don't want to have smudge marks. You don't want to accidentally fill in two bubbles or they won't count it. Those are things that can get your ballot thrown out. There have been like touchscreen voting in the past and computerized voting, but we are starting to go away from that. Anybody have any idea as to why we would start to go away from that digital computerized voting? Mr. Blood? Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest fears is in the last election was Russia hacking our election, right? It's a lot paper, it's harder to count, harder to tally up, but it's a lot safer. And then you can also vote absentee. So you saw with the example I gave you from My Vote Wisconsin, I voted absentee in the last ballot or the last election. You request it, they send you a ballot in the mail, and then you send it back. And that's one way you can do it if you're going to be out of town. because if I go on vacation to Florida, I can't vote in Florida on voting day. I have to vote in my town. So if I know I'm going to be gone, I can fill out an absentee ballot. Or you can just, anybody can do that nowadays. All right, let's keep going so we can get you guys out of here at a decent time.
All right, counting the votes. So votes are typically and primarily counted by machines and computers. So when you go to a polling place, you go to the little stand, you fill out your ballot. When you're done with that, you walk over to this computer-like machine. It's got a little like feeder. You stick it in it, scans it, says if it's done well or done correctly, it counts it, and you go about your way. Obviously, it has a recognition system to be able to check to see if it's filled out incorrectly. And then if it's filled out incorrectly, my understanding is then it has to be checked by person. So then someone has to go through, like say you circled in 2 people's, dots on the actual ballot. Then it has to be checked to see, well, how do we count that or can we not count that? So people have to make determinations based on, the protocols for that. We have Florida 2000 on there. So in the presidential election of 2000, George Bush and Al Gore were running against each other, and the Electoral College came down to the state of Florida. So it was a obviously key state, and what happened is the actual popular vote in that state came down to like less than 800 vote difference. So obviously when the final tally was calculated, George Bush was declared the winner, but then Al Gore wanted a recount. So they allowed the recount. They actually extended the deadline for the recount by a number of days because it took a long time to recount all those votes. And one issue they found was a thing called hanging chad. So Florida actually utilized a punch card voting system, so not a touch screen, not like a circle in the little dot. They actually used a punch card. So to vote, you had to punch out the little stamp thing where you wanted to vote for that person. Well, what happened was they noticed that a lot of the ballots had punches that only went through part way. So the paper, like if you ever done a hole punch, was only partially cut out. It was not fully punched out. So we had to determine, okay, how are we going to count these? Are we going to count them or not? Things of that nature. And then what actually happened is the process went on for a long time, and the Supreme Court actually got involved, ruled 5-4 that the recount would not occur, it would not continue, and that George Bush would be declared the winner based on the initial count of the votes. So that's my understanding of that, how the votes are counted.
As far as finding out, and that one, we didn't know who our president was until, so it's always like the first week in November. We didn't know until middle of December who won that election. And normally we find out the next day, right? And the reason we're able to normally find out are because of something called exit polls. It takes a long time to count tens of millions of votes. But if we do some exit polling of people as they're leaving the polling places, we can gain a pretty good idea of how each state has voted. So that's one of the reasons why we're able to know the next morning who our president's going to be. Unless it's a really close election, then sometimes we don't have that ability. So that's what exit polls are. Basically, when you leave, they just say, hey, we're doing some exit polling. We're wondering if you would tell us who you voted for. And you can say yes or no. But if they get a big enough sample size, then they can declare the winner without actually having to count the ballots right away. But eventually, they're all counted before the results are official.
All right, so quickly, popular vote. So most elections run on a popular vote or a simple vote, which means whatever candidate receives the most votes wins. These are used in most elections, obviously, it's like senator, representative, state elections, governor, things of that nature. Some states and some elections use what they call a runoff election, which means that, say you have 3 candidates in the election and none of the candidates receive a majority vote, meaning more than 50%. What they'll do is they will take top 2 candidates, so those top 2 that receive the most votes, and then they'll have another election between those 2 to see who gets the true majority. So that's what a runoff election is. I believe those are mainly only used in the South in states like Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia. They're not primarily used in the North for whatever reason. And obviously, as we know, the Electoral College controls the election process for presidents. It is not really a popular vote.
All right, lastly, there's a couple other types of elections that you guys should know about that you will see on your ballots at some point when you vote. Probably on here, the one that is most happens most often is a referendum. This is essentially a law that is decided by the people, right? So the legislature or the village or the school board writes the law, and then they let the people actually vote and decide whether or not they want this law to be passed. So these are used a lot of times for property tax increases, for like school referendums like we just passed, right? It's essentially the school and the city asking the people if we can raise their taxes to build a new school or an addition. That's a referendum. Referendums sometimes in other states have been used. So like Colorado passed a referendum to legalize marijuana. They let the people of Colorado decide, do you want to legalize marijuana or not? A proposition is more of just like a survey, right? So we had actually had a proposition for legalizing marijuana in the state of Wisconsin about 5 years ago. And basically the state legislature was doing a survey saying, hey, if we would legalize marijuana, how many of you would support this? And it gives the legislature something to work off of and to think about and have some data to see how popular a new law might be. Looking good, Mr. Blood. Lastly, a recall election. This is where you try to kick somebody out of office. The most recent example of this would be Governor Walker. After he got rid of collective bargaining rights for teachers and public employees in the state of Wisconsin, there was a big enough movement to try and recall him or kick him out of office. And he actually ended up winning that recall election, and he became the first governor in the history of the country to win a recall election. The other example was Gray Davis from California. He was recalled, and in his place, Arnold Schwarzenegger became the new governor of California. Did you guys know that Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California for a while? He was the governor. So those are some other elections that you guys might have to deal with. Hey guys, thanks for coming. What I want you to do after you leave here is go to Google Classroom. There is just something I want you to reply to. So it's a question. Explain 3 specific things you learned about what it means to be a voter in a Wisconsin election. Use 2 or 3 sentences. When you're done with that, you're done for the day. Does anybody have any questions about elections at all? Everybody's got the sunglasses on now. Looks great. Hey, thanks for showing up. If you have questions, stay on. If not, take care.
Dropping like flies.
Those are fancy, Hadia. Thanks for the eggs, Chance.